Holdfast by Worthington Games is a game system that I like very much. It simulates large, complex events from history, events that have to do with warfare, and it does so in an incredibly minimalistic way. There are short rules, so there is a limited number of game components, but a lot of work has been done for you, the player, at the time of designing the game, in hardwiring the main historical events simply by giving players different and very well tweaked schedules of reinforcements, replacement, resources. Instead of having, say, complex rules to show why a certain side stopped having resources in a certain turn, then you simply don't give the player resources. Which seems simple, obvious even, but there are just so many games that don't. Of course, again, there's a degree of abstraction in that. These designs, again, being very minimalistic, are also not very detailed, but they do represent their historical theme with wide brushstrokes, but not completely inaccurate. They still give you a feel for the historical event. Long intro to say, recently I played another game in this system, Holdfast, Tunisia, 1942-1943. So we're in North Africa, we are in the North African campaign, and we're gonna have Allies versus Germans fighting for control of Bizerte and Tunisia and the area surrounding those two cities, but actually mainly for those two cities. The Allies will have to push through German defenses as fast as possible before the Germans fully organize, and then they're able to start pushing back, and then the Allies will get a chance, will get a second win later in the game. The system, again, is very simple. The game is a block war game, so you're gonna have wooden blocks, and it's a kind of way of representing military units that I like very much, not just because of the aesthetic appeal that wooden blocks have, but because of the possibilities that they have in terms of recording information in an elegant and effective way, as I will show you during the game, when I tell you about the game. It is for 2 players, but it is also fully soloable, so you just play with all wooden blocks face up, and you control both sides at the best of your possibilities. Yes, you lose fog of war, but there's still a lot of randomness in the game when it comes especially to die rolls, that I think the game will still be able to surprise you enough to keep you entertained, to prevent you from just gaming the system and play as if you were playing chess by yourself. Without further ado, Tunisia, 1942-1943. The game is played on this nice looking mounted board. It is divided in hexes, as you can see. At the beginning of the game, the ally player will set up in this area here around these very important axes here that I'm gonna show you in a second. This one, and this one. They represent supply sources for the ally player, and also places that the ally player needs to defend in order to win. The German player will set up on this other side here around this area, and the 2 most important locations for the German player are Bizerte and Tunis. So, at the beginning of the game, you will notice that the action seems to take place on this side of the map, not so much in this area, but things may change. Now, victory conditions are very important. The ally player, in order to win, needs to take control of both Bizerte and Tunis, so those 2 hexes there. The German player will win by retaining control of at least one of those hexes and taking control of one of the supply sources of the ally player. If neither player manages to achieve their victory conditions by the end of the game, then the German player wins. That means that worst comes to worst, the German player wins by retaining control of at least one of those 2 axes there until the end of the game. That means that you may worry again about what is the point of this other half of the map here. Because yes, there will be back and forth here with massive attacks from the ally player trying to break through the defenses of the German player, but early on the German player is in a better position. The German player has a lot of units, they're strong, and chances are that the German player will want to start extending their front in this direction. Or maybe it will be the ally player that will do so. Maybe the ally player will extend the front to try to surround Tunis and to into attacking from multiple directions. Maybe it is the German player that now is extending the front in this direction in order to threaten these supply sources, especially this one, or nothing else. Because of this threat, but the German player maybe is trying to distract the Ally player, to divert forces that may attack Tunis or Bizerte and then now are used to extend and protect the flank. So you may have the situation, initial attack, then the front may extend, and then the front may start to narrow again. Maybe one side manages to punch through the front and to try to isolate the units of the opponent that left there, or simply, most likely, the Allied player will manage to force that front to crumble and will manage to direct the attention back to the victory areas later in the game, because starting from turn 9 the tide turns. But actually, let me show you the schedule of reinforcements and the allocation of resources so you can get a better sense of what I mean. On the back of the rulebook, you have a schedule of reinforcements that the two sides receive. As you can see, the German player receives a lot of reinforcements early on, but then in turn 9 and 10, it will be the Allied player that will receive a lot of reinforcements, and the German player none whatsoever for the rest of the game. And plus, we have a latecomer for the Allies. Also, resource points. Generally speaking, the more resource points you have, the better it is for you, the more things you can do. Early in the game, both players have first 6 resource points per turn, then 8, then 10. So they have the same amount of resources. Again, turn 9 is the turning point, because here's when the LA player starts getting ahead. Now the LA player has 2 resource points per turn more than the opponent, and replacements are more expensive for the German player. We'll talk about what that means, but for now, trust me, that means that when the two sides take damage, the Allied player is able to bring back units faster than the German player. Later on, the gap becomes even worse, because now it's 14 resource points per turn for the Allied player, and still 10, and still that penalty for the German player. Now, more in detail. This is a block game. That means that military units in this game are represented by stickers placed on wooden blocks, and they will be standing on the board facing the owning player, so that the opponent sees the back, sees where you have units, but not necessarily and exactly knows what those units are. It is when you're going to fight that then you're going to reveal the blocks, and so you get to know exactly what the opponent has, and then you resolve combat. Each block has a number of steps. When the block is standing on the board, the number of pips that you see on top is the number of steps or of life points, call it whatever you like, that the unit currently has. Right now, this unit has 3 steps. If it takes a hit, you rotate it by 90 degrees. Now the 2 is on top, and that indicates that the unit only has 2 steps left. Takes another hit, rotate it this way. Takes replacements, then you rotate it this way. So it's a very simple, elegant, and effective way of keeping track of how close to annihilation a unit is. If a unit has 1 step and it takes a point of damage, then it loses the last one and it is removed from the board. These are the numbers that you see here. This is the number of dice that the unit rolls in combat. It's a good reminder that it is a square, because the dice are, well, they look like they're made of squares. You only use regular 6-sided dice in the game. So this is how many dice are rolled in combat. This is the number to hit. For each die that the unit rolls in combat, it will score a hit on the opponent if it rolls the number or higher. This one, for example, scores a hit by rolling 5s or 6s. This one here rolls 3 dice in combat, but only scores a hit on a 6. And here in this triangle is the number of movement points that the unit has each turn when moving. Now, interesting enough, as you may have noticed, these numbers mean that the dice that are rolled in combat are separated from the steps that the unit has. In a lot of other block war games, you roll a die in combat for each step that you have. Here, well, I guess that there are fewer people in your unit, but the unit still retains more or less the same capability to inflict damage to the opponent, and that's why the number of dice rolled in combat does not change. Now, you may remember that I showed you those resource points, extremely important. Each turn, the ally player will go first. The ally player will spend their resource points, and then the German player will go and will do the same. The turn structure is pretty flexible, but and most importantly, the allocation of resources is incredibly flexible. The turn starts with the ally player receiving reinforcements as indicated on the schedule that I showed you earlier, and then the ally player can start spending resource points to bring back units that may have been destroyed earlier. So, for example, to bring back an infantry unit that was destroyed earlier, at one step it costs 2 resource points, and then other resource points can be spent to add the steps to reduce units that are on the board. Enemy units project a zone of control in the 6-axis surrounding them. If you are in an enemy zone of control and you have a supply line, you can still receive replacements, but only 1 point per turn. Supply is very important. You can trace supply through 3 axes, free of enemy zones of control, and then at the maximum distance of 3 axes, you need to be able to reach a road that then traces a line free of enemy units and enemy zones of control to a supply line. And the presence of friendly units negates the enemy zones of control for those purposes. So, for example, this unit here would be in supply because you can trace a supply here, and then here it's okay because the unit is preventing that. No, and then we need this one to block that zone of control. So at the beginning of a player's turn, the ally player each turn, because the ally player goes first, that active player can spend resource points to get reinforcements, to get replacements. Now, interesting enough is it's the same pool of resource points that then you will spend to activate your units for movement and for combat. That means in a turn you can get a lot of replacements and not move much, or you feel strong enough and then you spend a lot in operations, in moving and attacking. I love the flexibility that comes from this. For a resource points, you can activate a unit for movement. The unit will move up to its full movement allowance. Cost will depend on the X sites that are crossed and the terrain that is entered. Usually, moving by road means that you'll get to move at a cost of 1 movement point. Moving into rough terrain or even into regular terrain without using roads cost more, and also there is an extra cost that you pay to enter or move through enemy zones of control. So if you're trying to slow down the opponent, you can play with the zones of control a little bit. So 1 resource point to move a unit. Also, a unit can move up to twice the sprinter movement allowance if it starts and performs movement without ever being in an enemy zone of control, which is good to bring in reinforcements quickly. Now, you can also spend a resource points to declare an attack against an enemy X. Suppose I spent a resource point and I say, okay, we're gonna attack this one. Then I can attack with any and all of my units that are adjacent to that unit. In this case, I could do this. Now, this is kind of fun. Suppose that I spent a resource point to do this, and then a resource point to do that. Then I spent a resource point to attack that unit, and suppose we destroy it. Other units that haven't activated yet, they can do their thing. For example, this unit attacked but did not move. Units can attack and move, or move and attack, or only move or only attack. So, for example, I could activate this unit for movement now, and now, for example, I could put it there. I don't know if it would be a great move, but it's just to show you how you can use some units to clear a path and then move other units through it, and maybe use them to launch a second attack somewhere else. I love this flexibility, which is much higher than you have in other games, in which first you move with all of your units, then you resolve all attacks, and then before you can move again and attack again, you had to wait until next turn. So that is pretty neat. To roll to attack, well, pretty much we explained that. You roll the dice that apply to the unit. There may be modifiers based on terrain, such as attacking across a river. Unit, the players have extra assets. For example, there's support. They can decide to spend to receive extra dice, but there's the general idea. You declare the attack. The attacker rolls all of their dice, and the defender rolls all of their dice. Hits are paid for in terms of step reductions. If a unit is eliminated, well, I guess you guessed it, it's eliminated. There isn't advance after combat per se, again, because by timing and sequencing you have movements, well, you can simply still take advantage of a cleared defending X by moving other units. There's a general idea, really. The American player, the Allied player gets replacements, moves and attacks, then the German player does the same. You go to the next turn and you repeat like this until, well, you remember the victory conditions. The German player takes control of one of these supply sources and still retains control of one of those X's. Then the German player wins, or the Allied player takes control of those two X's, in which case the Allied player takes control of those two X's, in which case the Allied player wins. Now, I like the Holdfast system, and I like, of course, how it is implemented in some games more than others. The first game that used it was about the Eastern Front in World War II, and I loved it. So much flexibility, so many different things that you could do with such a minimalistic core of rules. Then I played the one about Korea, and I didn't enjoy that one all that much. It felt to me that in that one, the script was a little too strong. The different ways of reinforcements will cause certain chains of events to happen. Almost unavoidably, you were gonna have a side that was gonna push and retreat, and the other side then push or retreat when the wave of reinforcements changed. It just felt each section you were just following that script. I was a little worried about finding something like this in Tunisia because of the big wave of reinforcements that the Germans have, and then the second wave of reinforcements and enhanced resources that the Allies have in the second part of the game. But that was not it. I didn't have the problem at all. I would say having that big turning point, and is one big turning point in the game, did not bother me at all. It made the first and the second half of the game different from one another. But then within there were just still so many different possibilities. And yes, again, most likely you will see certain patterns from game to game. But within those patterns, there's still there's a huge variety of things that you can do. As the Allies, again, you can try to outflank the Germans. In any case, you may have to prevent the Germans from outflanking you. So this front that widens and then hopefully for the Allied player narrows later. You may see that each game or every game, but then how you distribute your units, how you negotiate with terrain, which is so prohibitive, so complex, because of the escarpments, because of the rivers. You're in the desert and you still have to worry about rivers. The irony. Because of the net of roads, it creates bottlenecks that make for very valuable points if you can take control of those to cut enemy supplies, and of course they make for very interesting places, exciting places for you to defend, because the threat is real. In fact, when you are left without supplies, the game is particularly brutal. There are games in which if you are out of supply at the end of a turn, you get a penalty. Here you get a penalty when you're out of supply during the turn, when you activate a unit, and then the unit is eliminated if it is still out of supply by the end of the turn. So you have these brave encirclements, and you have people desperately fighting to get out of those encirclements. And you have, again, the temptation of going after enemy units, because if you can encircle those units and destroy them all, that is really tempting and will give you some sort of advantages. But as the ally player, you are fighting against the clock, and so ultimately victory is based on control of specific locations. You may have an allied loss, an allied defeat, in which the allied player destroyed almost every German bloc, but just there was that one block that was left, and by the way, it was sitting in Bizerte or Tunis, and that caused the Allied defeat. Much better to do harm reduction, learn to coexist with the enemy, keep them at bay as you concentrate your forces where you need them along the front, punch through and manage to take control of those objectives while protecting your lines. So there is a very interesting back and forth. There is a very organic, dynamic interaction between the two sides, and to me that was a lot of fun. It certainly didn't hurt that these events came to life through a game system that, again, is so simple, so linear. The focus of your experience will be entirely on what you do, as opposed to following all the rules and make sure that you implement all of the procedures. One thing, speaking about the rules, so there are a couple of things that are a little bit opaque, probably a little bit of extra explanation wouldn't have hurt. From time to time I made a couple of judgment calls here, and since we're talking about the negative, but there are minor negatives, also I wouldn't mind if the wooden blocks look more different from one another. The color is not that different from one another, and sometimes you have, say, the axis blocks. I talk about Germans the entire review, but of course there are also the Italians there. So the axis blocks, some are gray but with a green sticker, and then you have some ally stickers, ally block, which are green with another greenish sticker. Somehow I was a little bit confused. I wish that I was able at a glance to see exactly where the front was. More contrast would have made maybe the palette less historical, more, I don't know, cartoonish, but also more vivid, and would have made gameplay even more intuitive. These small negatives, I don't know, I guess I'm just nagging just to show you that I gave a thorough look at this design, because these negatives are really minor. Overall, what you have here is an immensely playable game that definitely a beginner wargamer could play, definitely could be a good intro war game. Has a lot of flexibility. The idea of resources can be spent alternately to strengthen units or to move them or to attack. To me, is great. It is one of the key elements of the design that really makes gameplay so varied, and yet at the same time, again, so simple, so intuitive. Tunisia, 1942-1943, new game in the Holdfast system, and definitely a very strong entry in the system.